I'm Matt the Jerk here with Dynasty Owner, and today we're going to finish up our contract breakdown series by talking about the NFC contract recaps. So if you read and listened last week, you know that we talked about the AFC. I recapped all 16 teams, all 16 articles that I went through for the entire offseason. And today we're going to go over the NFC contracts. So 16 of them. Bear with me. We're going to go through them pretty quick here. And obviously, like always, go see my article at Dynasty Owner if you want a little bit more info. I tend to break it down a little bit more efficiently in the actual contract. So let's jump right into it with the NFC recaps. First team I want to talk about, first division really is going to be the NFC East. So we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. This division should be fresh in your mind because we just finished up with them. They were the last division that I talked about in all my contract breakdowns. So in the Cowboys article, I did a breakdown of Michael Gallup. He continues to be undervalued heading into the regular season. He has a single year left on his contract. It's a very cheap contract, $880,000. I wouldn't say that I peg him for a starting wide receiver, but he's a very, very safe bench wide receiver if you need one. For the Giants article, I compared all four of their top wide receivers. So they are Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slayton. Main thing I want to do with this article was I kind of differentiated between a single year, so 2021, and the next 3 years looking out, and how my rankings change between those four players. Kenny Golladay actually came in number one for both of those breakdowns. So even for this year and then for the next 3 years, he's got an expensive contract, but he's just going to be productive enough to overcome that contract, especially if you save early on running backs like we constantly preach in Dynasty Owner. But what's interesting is that as it goes through the next 3 years, I have Kadarius Toney as number two, whereas he's ranked last for just this season. We know it usually takes rookie wide receivers a little bit of time to break into the league, so nothing really new there. Like I said, I don't expect him to make a big impact this year, but look forward to his 2022, 2023, and beyond seasons. Eagles article, I talked about Jalen Reagor and Devonta Smith, kind of compared them. I like both players. Obviously, Devonta Smith is going much higher in Dynasty Owner drafts than Reagor is. When I wrote my article, like I said, it was only about a month ago. Devonta Smith his ADP was 57.2. Reagor's was 147.9. Nothing's really changed since then. We have like a 1 point difference between both of those. So nobody's really jumping on the Jalen Reagor train, even though I tried to start it. There shouldn't be that big of a gap between those two. It's just not that big of a discrepancy between the two players. And, I know that Devonta Smith's coming as the shiny new weapon, but Jalen Reagor is going to be plenty fine for what he's, carrying into this season, especially with a salary of $3.3 million. Finally, I talked about the Washington football team just a few weeks ago. One of my favorite players this season, I talked about him as a possible league winner. It's Antonio Gibson. So I've been targeting him in every Dynasty Owner league, every redraft, every keeper league that I've had. He has league winning potential. And that happens when you have a player that's on a cheap contract, $1.2 million in the case of Gibson, and he's projected to be a top tier player. So running back 12 is where he's projected right now. Just great value for him. So talking about the NFC North, switching over, Vikings article I talked about first. So I wrote about Irv Smith Jr., really a moot point now. You can go ahead and read the article, but pretty much everything I talked about is going to have to put off until 2022 just because of his devastating, most likely season-ending injury. So really not much else to talk about at that point. Like I said, we'll push off his breakdown until next year. So in the Bears article, I wrote about David Montgomery. I pinned him as a high-value running back, and I compared him to a few other players, James Robinson, Naeem Hines, Myles Gaskin, and Chase Edmonds. I have all the numbers in the article if you go and read it. I'm not going to really talk about those all right now, but suffice it to say, Montgomery is going to be a great deal coming into this season. No matter where he finishes, I think as long as he gets the volume that we're projecting he gets, he's not going to get the receiving volume, but as long as he gets that rushing volume, he's going to be a top 10 value for running backs, barring an injury, obviously. Main takeaway from the Lions article is how efficient DeAndre Swift was last season. He ranked, I believe, second. I'll have to go back and look, but ranked second in my efficiency metric. I'm looking at fantasy points per opportunity. He was second only behind Alvin Kamara, so very efficient. No doubt that efficiency is going to decrease as usage increases. Obviously, we hope that his usage increases this season. But even with the slight decrease in efficiency, he should still be a top running back value when you take into into account his salary. So $2.1 million right now is what he's costing owners. And Robert Tonyan, we'll talk about him with the Packers. So he finished as tight end 5. You hear tight end 5, you get excited. I get excited. But I break down the real big difference between tight end 5 and tight end 2 is a massive difference, especially when you compare tight end 5 to tight end 20. And so I compared him to Kelsey and Kittle a little bit, and I also compared him to the tight end 20. And there was really only a 60.2 point difference between tight end 5 and tight end 20 last year. It's important. I mean, those points matter, but it's just not that great of a difference as you would expect. Up next, the NFC South. So the Falcons article, I talked about Hayden Hurst. Really not much to talk about. I wrote that article before Kyle Pitts was drafted, so it's kind of a moot point for Hurst. He's still going to play a role in that offense, just not as much as I expected him to play. Bucs article. So I was talking about the running back by committee that they have in Tampa Bay and how both players would essentially hamper each other. I wouldn't want either to be my starting running back, but either Fournette or Ronald Jones would be just fine as a flex or bench running back. I wrote about Christian McCaffrey in my Panthers article. There really isn't much more to say about him. I mean, everybody knows he's the best. He's the best there is. Maybe not value-wise anymore with his $16 million contract, but he will probably be the top producing fantasy player this season, barring quarterbacks. And just as far as wide receivers and running backs and tight ends go, he'll probably be the highest producer. Really not much to say about him there. In the Saints article, I wrote mainly about the upcoming NFL news. We had the draft coming up. We had NFL free agency that was about to open up. So with that behind us, there's really no reason to talk about much of that. Instead, I'll talk about Emmanuel Sanders, who was released by the Saints 2 weeks after I wrote my article, and he went to Buffalo. He became one of Buffalo's seemingly core receiving groups, maybe an ancillary piece, but it's worth noting Sanders is 34 years old. He's going to be the wide receiver 3 at best there behind Diggs and Beasley. Probably worth a roster spot for $6 million, but I don't see him as much more than a bench wide receiver. And finally, we're going to talk about the NFC West. NFC West, actually the first article I wrote in this series was the Cardinals article, and Kyler Murray was featured. And in that article, I put together a list of a few of the top producing quarterbacks. And you can go to the article and look at all those. Essentially what it boils down to is that when you look out 2021 season and then even the 2022 season with projected salaries, Kyler is going to continue to be a value more than anybody, probably except for Justin Herbert, just because Herbert's on a cheaper salary. And then he also has an extra year, Herbert does, compared to Murray. The Rams article, I talked about Robert Woods and Jared Goff's contract. Goff, it's no surprise. I've said this many times. He's on an awful contract, at least for Dynasty owner. It's going to be very tough for you to overcome that if you own him in Dynasty owner and try to compete, for the championship with his salary on the books. 49ers article, did a blind comparison of Brandon Ayuk and DJ Moore. This was one of my favorite articles to write, actually. The end result was me going for DJ Moore, but it was a lot closer than I would have thought. Hopefully it was a lot closer than a lot of you would have thought. I put their stats in the article. Go ahead and read those. And finally, it was the Seattle Seahawks where I compared Tyler Lockett against himself. So I compared his first half of his 2020 season versus the second half of his 2020 season. And it's really eye-opening how different of a season. Both were good. His second half was worse, but it was still I would say an above average wide receiver statistic line. Just want to put that into context on how, Jekyll and Hyde of a season he had and how, if he'd have had the first half and the second half and the second half and the first half, we'd be talking about him, I think, a little bit higher in his ADP just because people tend to remember what had happened more recently when they start to draft. So that's every player. That's every team that I broke down. I wanted to thank everybody for reading. Next week, we have real-life football. So we're going to start to get into the real actual statistics that matter. I appreciate everybody following us at Dynasty Owner on Twitter, and then follow me at Dynasty Jerk on Twitter as well. I appreciate everybody taking the time to read, to listen, and hope everyone takes care and be safe.